I'm super excited for our speaker today, Dan Horwich. Dan's going to talk about the power of networking in a very unique and powerful way. I'm super excited to hear his presentation. Dan and I connected immediately from the first meeting we had. Dan's a super connector out there in the world and all around great guy. Dan's built a community of IT professionals, has a mailing list of 1.5 million IT professionals where he hosts physical and virtual events throughout the year. But without further delay, I want to get right into it. I'm excited to introduce my friend Dan Horwich. Stage is yours, Dan.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for spending time with us today. And I was honored that Jeff asked me to speak. I shared this presentation with him several weeks back when we first met, and it's something that's really important to me. And how this all came about 5 years ago, there's a CIO, a Chief Information Officer in transition group that had been asking me to speak about networking. And I really didn't have a slide deck or any idea what I was going to talk about. And they said, well, you run a second generation family conference business. Obviously, you know something about networking. And I said, well, all right, let me think about that. So I sort of punted at that point. And then about 6 months later, now being about 4 years ago, I'm having dinner with my father and brother. It was kind of like a guy's night out. And my father said to my brother, did you tell Danny what we found? And my brother said, no. And he said, tell him. And my brother said, do you remember that suitcase that Grandma and Grandpa had when we were growing up? And obviously this was a long time ago. And I said, yeah, I remember that suitcase. And he said, well, do you know what was in it? And I said, no. He said, well, neither did we. It was in Mom and Dad's crawl space for 30 years. So we opened it up. What my brother and father found were all the original letters my grandfather wrote to escape the Holocaust, along with his passports that had swastikas on them from when he was in Vienna. And the light bulb went on. All of a sudden, I had an idea for a presentation. And the theme behind this presentation is networking for life, a fresh perspective on making a difference for others. To give you an idea about me, so obviously this is what's important to me, being husband, father, son, entrepreneur. The reason my logo is on there is only for one reason. It's really more context. In order to do what I do for a living, I have to know how to network. But the thing that I really want to point out here is that I'm really grateful to be here, not just in the session right now, but I'm grateful to be alive. And I'll explain to you about that in a second. So I designed this networking pyramid. And when I was putting together this pyramid for a couple of years ago when I wrote this presentation, for those of you that took Psych 101 in college, this may resemble Maslow's hierarchy. At least that's what came to mind when I was designing it. The top level being, self-actualization, right? Getting to that point of it's really about others. So at the bottom level, when we network, it's about building friendships, connections, community, being a part of something greater than we're part of now, because studies have shown that when we're part of a group, when we're making a difference, we feel better about ourselves. We feel like we can be more impactful. At the next level, I put landing a job, closing a deal. We build those relationships so that we can find opportunities. But my argument really is at the top of this pyramid, we need to focus on helping others, maybe that can't find their own way, or due to circumstances beyond their own fault, or whatever it may be. How can we help them? How can we open up doors to people who are either less fortunate or people that don't always have those networking skills? So this was the suitcase that I was referencing. And that's a sketch of my late grandfather. His name was Joseph Rosenfeld, my maternal grandfather. This was the suitcase that was in the crawl space for 30 years. And for whatever reason, my mother didn't want to look at it, I think for sentimental reasons, quite frankly. But this was where all the documents were. This was my Grandpa Joe. He came from an affluent bookkeeping family in Vienna, Austria. He was born in 1894. This was his family before the war. So this was him with his mustache, 2 nephews. His mother passed away before the war, but with the exception of my grandfather and his 2 nephews, everyone else here was slaughtered by Hitler. And the question is, how did he survive? And really it comes down to networking, and I'll explain that. So when we look at it, and I don't want to focus too much on the Holocaust because everyone's heard so much about it, but just to kind of give you perspective. So the total numbers, and this will give you an idea of really how he was able to escape and what the chances really were of him being able to escape. So total numbers of everyone that was murdered with 11 million. There are 420, these numbers all came from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. 420,000 survivors, In his concentration camp, which was Dachau, 206,000, and he was one of 32,000 that survived. Here's a picture of Dachau. So how did he live while everyone else, while all these others were murdered? Well, my grandfather had an idea while he was in Dachau, but before it became a full-blown concentration camp, it was a work camp. So he had a little bit of lateral movement. He went to the American consulate, and he tried to locate a page in the New York phone book. And in the New York phone book, he was going to write a letter to everyone with the last name Rosenfeld, asking them to sponsor him, asking them to pretend to be a relative. Well, this page was ripped out. So he found a Chicago phone book, wrote a letter to everyone with the last name Rosenfeld. Some time goes by, he gets a letter back from a Harry Rosenfeld, pretending to be his Uncle Harry. And he paused for a second, then he realized what the letter was for. He and Harry start communicating over a period of time. Harry agrees to rescue him and bring him to the United States. But then for a little while, my grandfather hadn't heard from Harry. Finally, he receives another letter from Harry Rosenfeld, who says basically, "Dear friend, I'm sorry I haven't been in touch. My mother-in-law passed away. It's been a trying time. I don't want to get in trouble with the unions, so I'm not going to be able to save you. And I'm really sorry. I wish you the best. Hopefully you can find another way out." Was really the context of it all. My grandfather responds back in a letter using what we would call today empathy, emotional intelligence, and basically says, "Harry, I'm so sorry to hear about your mother-in-law. I can only imagine it's a trying time. My thoughts are with you, but I do ask that you would reconsider, because if you don't, I will not make it." Well, here's the final letter that my grandfather received back from Harry Rosenfeld. And if you can't read it because it's an 83-year-old document, it says, "To Joseph Rosenfeld." It's dated at the top December 16th, 1938. And it says, "Dear friend, go to the American consul. He has all the papers for you to come to the United States. Let me know when you're leaving. Yours truly, Harry Rosenfeld." This was the document that he was waiting for. Here's his passport. You can see with the swastika on it, blown up. And so when I look at all this and the fact that he was rescued, it's really a miracle that I'm here, because there's several scenarios that have gone through my mind as to what could have happened. The Holocaust doesn't happen. He stays in Vienna. Naturally, he doesn't come to Chicago to meet my grandmother. Or it does happen and he doesn't survive. So again, my family, we don't exist then. Or he moves to New York instead of Chicago and doesn't meet my Grandma Ray. Or he comes to Chicago, but my Grandma Ray and my Grandpa Joe are passing ships in the night. But here's what happened. He's rescued, he's brought to Chicago, marries my grandma, has my mom, and now there are 3 generations that are here due to the kindness of a stranger. My parents at their 50th wedding anniversary 2 years ago, my wife Jamie and I, and our daughters Hallie and Lily, my brother, his wife Tracy, and their boys, Joshua and Ethan. So it's not lost on me, really, how lucky we all are, right? Just to even be born. But in my particular situation, had someone not extended themselves and saved my grandfather, poof, right? I don't exist. So the argument then becomes, how do we respond to this? And how does someone who has a family history of this deal with it? You could respond with a certain amount of guilt, a certain amount of sadness. I choose hope. And rather than focusing on the past and thinking about what my family went through, I have to figure out how I act. Now, folks have asked me, have I dealt with anti-Semitism? Have I dealt with bigotry? And how do you respond? And the only reason I'm discussing this is, a lot of times we have 2 ways we can respond to negative events. So in 1990, I was a freshman at IU. My roommate put a swastika on the door and his best friend said, "We need to finish off all the Jews." 1996, I was a salesperson at US Robotics, and a woman in order management had just had a newborn child. I congratulated her and I said, "How's your son doing?" She said, "He's fine, but my daughter's better because every time," and I said, "Why's your daughter better?" And she said, "Because every time someone cuts us off in Northbrook, my daughter's trained to say damn Jew." And in 1997, that same company, a product manager was talking about all the whiny Jews he plays basketball with, and he was sending me a message. So I mention this to you because what I've learned through these situations is it's hard, I'm sure, for others, for some folks more so than others, but we have 2 ways we can respond to things. And here's how I choose to respond. When we have something negative that comes at us, rather than responding negatively, take that negative energy, pivot it, and turn into positive energy and go help someone else out. It could be a bad boss, it could be a bad colleague, it could be a business deal that's gone south. But instead of stewing on certain things, and granted, I know it's easier for some than for others, you learn how to pivot. So I focus on optimism and hope, obviously because of the kindness of a stranger. And I'm going to give you just a few quick examples out of respect for time as to what we all can do. So 4 years ago, December 2016, and these aren't their names. Their names are Warren and Eileen, but I just didn't want to publish it. We were down there visiting our friends Warren and Eileen. Eileen was my wife's big sister in a sorority in the 90s at American. And Warren had just been diagnosed with diabetes. And we said, as we were embracing and saying goodbye to them, I said, how are you feeling? And he said, well, I'm feeling fine. He said, I thought I was on death's doorstep, but I'm feeling fine. 3 months go by. My wife's on the couch with his, on the phone with his wife. We're back in Chicago in March. And my wife's crying. And I said, what's going on? And she said, Warren has got liver and stomach cancer. And she said, I need you to, and my wife's hysterical because she's known them for years, for decades. And I wasn't even sure how to react. And she said, well, tell me he's going to be okay. And I said, honey, I can't promise that, but let's figure something out. 3 weeks go by and they're talking on the phone. And I said, what does Warren need? Ask Eileen what Warren needs. They said, well, he needs an experimental drug. Well, it just so happens I had 6 months before I had listened to this TED Talk by Jay Bradner. And Jay Bradner was valedictorian of Highland Park High School, where I went to high school. So on a whim, I pinged Jay and said, leveraging my network, and said, hey, I've got a situation. We haven't spoken in 25 years, Jay. I would never come with my hand out, but there's a challenge here. Jay, this is on a Tuesday afternoon. Monday night was the phone call my wife had with Eileen. Tuesday morning, I'm thinking about this Tuesday afternoon. I emailed Jay. He responds back to me in an hour. He's like, I'm so sorry about your friend's plight. I have copied the guy who's head of experimental drugs for stomach cancer in Florida. This gentleman who he copied responds back to me 20 minutes later and says, tell me where your friends are, have them send me your records. Let's go. Let's get them in on Thursday and figure out how we can start these treatments. All through the power of networking. I'd like to say to you that saved his life. It didn't. We lost a friend 3 years ago. But what I will say is what would have happened if it had, right? All through the power of connections. And when I mention these things, to what Jeff was saying earlier about looking beyond ourselves and helping the others, by the very fact that we're all on this call and we all either know how to network or learning how to network, learning how to grow our networks, we can help folks in an amazing number of ways just by figuring out how we can help them, because they're human beings first, right? Business opportunity second. I'll give you another example. Reginald is a cashier at Walgreens and a wonderful, wonderful guy. And I remember coming in the Walgreens in Glenview, near where I live, and the warmth and kindness that he showed was just extraordinary. Well, 3 people come in, and basically how it happened was I walked in the store and he said, hello, sir, how can I help you? And I said, I'm fine. He's like, well, my name's Reginald. If you need anything, you come and find me. And I was really taken by that, right? Because you don't always see a cashier going above and beyond, because that's not generally their role. 3 people coming after me, they totally dismiss him. So it kind of bothered me. So I went up to Reginald and I said, I want to apologize for those individuals. Is this happen on a regular basis? He's like, well, I deal with it. I said, you shouldn't have to. So I went up to his manager, or I asked him if I could find his manager, and he was a bit perplexed as to why. And I said, well, you need kudos on this. It's incredible. His manager came up to me and said, was there a problem with Reginald? And I said, a problem? I said, he's your star employee. His manager said, well, do you see that receipt you have? And I said, yes. And he said, well, there's an 800 number at the bottom of it. Will you call that number? I said, I'm not calling an 800 number. That's not going to go anywhere. He said, well, sure it will. I said, I've got another idea. So that afternoon, I literally 20 minutes after I was there, I typed up an email to the top 6 or 7 executives at Walgreens corporate, sent them an email and said, this gentleman is your champion. He's your ambassador. Like, you need to take care of him in a very polite way, because I'm not going to go lecture people. And the gentleman, Steven St. Rose, he may still be there. At the time, he was the chief human resources officer for all of Walgreens Boots Alliance. And there's one other person on here that responded back to me. But the CEO was on here, the CIO was on here as well. So my whole point in any of this is we can do simple gestures leveraging our network. We can open up doors for individuals that maybe need a boost. And the impact it has is tremendous. 2 weeks later, I came back to this Walgreens and Reginald saw me and he looked at me, and the words he would use were, "Hey brother, come here." And I said, "You remember me, Reginald?" And he said, "What you did for me?" I said, "I didn't do anything for you." He said, "Well, that email you wrote." I said, "That email took me all of 90 seconds to write, and I could figure out the email addresses very quickly." I said, "But the way you live your life inspired me." Now, I know he probably walked away feeling great from that, right? But I also know that's probably something that's going to stay with him, and he'll pay it forward for someone else. I'll give you another example. My wife's a pastry chef by training. Flowered Apron is now closed, but she was volunteering at the Flowered Apron. Why? Because it was helping other women that were coming from less fortunate situations, helping them boost their pastry skills so they could get jobs, they could be employed, they could help open up their own businesses. And that, just by lending our time and lending our experiences, makes a huge impact. One of the final examples I'll give you is my daughter Haley, 4 years ago, about 3.5 years ago, when she was 9 at the time. She came downstairs one night, was really upset about the hurricanes in Southern Florida, because we have friends there. Our friend Amy and her partner Maria live there. And my daughter, our daughter Haley, sorry, that was my Alexa going on. Our daughter Haley was really upset by that. So she said, "I want to do something about it." And we said, and this was totally unprompted by us. We said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "Well, I've been playing violin for a while. How about I get a couple of friends and we figure out how to raise money?" At 9 years old. So she and her girlfriends had this concert. In total, they raised $3,600 payable to the American Red Cross. We leveraged Facebook to create awareness. Online, we had $2,800 in contributions. 80 people showed up, giving an average of $10. And she made a difference. Now, when I show you these examples, I don't want you to look at this and say, this is great. This is what Danny Horwich is boasting about his family doing. What I want you to take away from this is, if my small family can do this, anyone can do it. It's really a matter of thinking about how we can help other folks, leveraging our network, leveraging contacts that we have, moving the ball forward. And sometimes maybe it's just rewiring of the brain. So some causes that we've that I would suggest, or things that we can do, is focusing on, like, if you run into someone who's in the military, rather than just saying thank you for your service, and give them your business card and say, if you ever decide to come to civilian life, call me. You've protected us. I want to help you. Other social causes, some of the ones I was mentioning. Junior Achievement's been great. IC Stars has been helping individuals in the city get themselves trained and through IC Stars, and find good paying positions that would be 2 to 3 times what they would have made had they not been trained by the IC Stars group. Project Reload, helping veterans transition into civilian life. So on behalf of my grandfather's experience, on behalf of my family, I sincerely appreciate your generosity of time. I hope that this short presentation gave you some ideas to think about and ways you can expand your network by paying it forward.